So an investigation is currently underway, which is the protocol for any police shooting. But from the looks of it, this does seem to be justified, as the man was ignoring commands to drop the knife and he kept approaching police. So what are some of your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the most important thing about the video is not only the demands for Mr. Wallace to then throw down the knife or the deadly weapon, but also if you look at the two officers before the shooting, they were retreating. They were walking backwards. And in spite of that, a reduced ability for violence, what ended up happening is Mr. Wallace continues to walk around the car and approach these officers. At that point in time, it's very clear to any law enforcement officer or reviewing agency that Mr. Wallace was the aggressor and quite violent. He was hell-bent, it would seem, on attacking the officers with a knife. So in my opinion, it is a justified shooting. It perhaps could have not resulted in a fatality, but police officers are trained with one singular goal in mind when they discharge a firearm. That is to eliminate the threat to themselves, to the community, and to other officers. So I agree with your analysis, and I would say that it is, in fact, a justified shooting, and I believe that's the way that the verdict will come down.
So we see the argument is about use of deadly force. When is it justified? When is it not justified? So legally speaking, what is the threshold there? I know it probably varies by departments, but when I look at a street fight, for example, as we saw between the suspect here who ends up dying and the police officers, sometimes a knife can actually be much more deadly in close quarter confrontations. You can whip that out and you can slice people very fast, whereas guns can be a little more unwieldy, and it's a lot harder to aim as well and to get the safety off and to actually pull the trigger and to fire the gun. So what would be the threshold for use of deadly force?
Well, you astutely point that out, and that's why firearms training is so important. Many times when a first-time firearm user is obtaining a firearm, they're taught very clearly, be careful when you use this because it may not be the best weapon to use. It can be taken from you. But let's talk about what's legal and what the reviewing agency and the prosecutorial agency will discuss. They will discuss whether this falls under the umbrella of potentially fatal action. And a knife surely qualifies. A knife can kill, a knife can disfigure, and a knife can put the community at risk. So it is fatal force that under any law in the Union can be responded to with fatal force as well.
We know the suspect in this case, before police arrived, he was arguing with his family. They say he has mental health issues, a history of mental health, and he was walking around with a a knife in the neighborhood. And now we see these protesters saying justice for Walter here. And when it comes to this, in my opinion, it almost seems like they're trying to take the city hostage and put pressure on the court, saying to investigate the cops, bring charges, or else we'll completely burn down the city.
That's right. It's hard to disagree with. We see this pattern throughout the United States when there's an officer-involved shooting and the victim happens to meet a certain profile. Immediately there's violence, there's vandalism, there's an implied threat to police to not investigate and not to stand their ground when there's this type of potential fatal force. So you're right. Unfortunately, in the United States now, and maybe it's just in this timeline that we're looking at coming to this election, this has been normalized. Taking to the streets without the right legal training to know what was correct and what is incorrect is not something the citizenry should do. They should leave it to the authorities who have the training and the experience and the legal knowledge to discover whether the officers did something correctly or incorrectly. It's been normalized to the point of an expectation, and that's a dire proposition for law enforcement and law-abiding members of the community.